this is going on, if we have to get, one on YouTube and one on Facebook and one somewhere else for these meetings.
It's almost there. Okay, you're live.
Thank you very much. All right, I'll call to order this meeting of the Human Relations Board for Wednesday, September 17th. Thanks folks for being here. I know we've got some good information that we're going to learn about today. As we're just waiting on one more to log in, we'll hold off on approval of the minutes. But if did anyone have any questions or comments about the minutes? I realize we haven't met for a while. We've had a pandemic that we've been dealing with, so those minutes go back to February. Otherwise, if you think of anything, let me know. We'll hold that for next month. I will call for any public comments. Do we have anybody who's in the queue for public comment? I don't know whether that's something Michelle would be looking at. I have no idea.
She would, but we would also see either a number or another square, and I do not see anyone.
Okay. Yep, I just see the Chris and his doppelganger. All right, so we have no public comments. I'm going to move right into the new business. I know that Rebecca and Chief Blocker have some good things to share with us, some interesting things, and so I'm going to let you just jump right in.
Sure, and Chief and I didn't script this, but Chief, would you like me to go first?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you very much, Susan, and to the members of the Human Relations Board for letting us come and talk. We are certainly living through some interesting times, and putting the pandemic aside, the city has certainly not been immune from the many discussions around racial justice. After the murder of George Floyd, Battle Creek also experienced many protests, demonstrations, vigils. And what we appreciated is that we weren't asked, nobody was looking for permission. They were just asking for the city to be a part and to be a partner in the conversations going forward. And we really appreciated that. And those conversations continue. And a couple of things that came out of that was a convening of a group with the Southwest Michigan Urban League, as well as the African American Collaborative. They asked to put together or to have a conversation with Chief Blocker and I and make a request of the city for a couple of things. One would be to convene and have a community conversation with the African American community in Battle Creek. And the other would be for the city to undergo an equity audit. Certainly the city is on board with that. And actually we have had the first in a series of conversations with the African American community, which both Chief Blocker and I will talk about. And we are working together with a planning team to put together a scope of work for an equity audit. I will be upfront and honest, that is not something that I was familiar with prior to being asked. So I've certainly done my Google research and read a lot of articles, and certainly taken input from the African American Collaborative and the Urban League, and as well as the other members of our planning team. So that team included Kyra Wallace of the Urban League, Ellie Johnson of the Urban League, Dr. Nakia Bayless of the United Way, and Dr. Alicia Johnson of the African American Collaborative. And there's a lot of overlapping between the Urban League and the African American Collaborative. So I might have that off a little bit, and then Chief Blocker and myself were that planning team. And so they have been very helpful in working on a scope of work for the equity audit, as well as referring any consultants that they may have familiarity with who have done equity audits. And I'll talk about the specifics that in a few minutes. I'll come back to that. The other item was that community conversation with the African American community, which was held on August 31st at Friendship Park. There was a panel discussion. Chief Blocker and I were certainly part of the panel. Dr. Johnson and Dr. Bayless served as the moderators. And then Ellie and Kyra were certainly spokespersons there as well. I think from my, I would say, anecdotal count, there was probably 75 to 100 people there. It was a beautiful evening to have it outside, certainly with a lot of social distancing in place, masks and hand sanitizers. And it was not a convening that the city did. We were just asked to be partners in the convening. It was really to bring together the Black community to get input on one very specific question. How are you feeling about being, a Black citizen in the city of Battle Creek at this time? And that was publicized beforehand. Appreciate all the work, the outreach work that the Urban League and the African American Collaborative did. And then it was an open mic to share, the responses to that question. And that was the evening, about 2 hours. A lot of good responses. I think the majority of them a lot of it was directed at Chief Blacker, but not just in regards to the police department, but the justice system as a whole in Calhoun County. And the planning team early on had hoped that they would glean from the conversation a couple of things: inform the scope of work for the equity audit, and that there would be some action items from the conversation and then themes that could be used to inform the next conversation. Because I think I said, and it's always been envisioned, that this be a series of conversations with the Black community in Battle Creek. And I think we got there. The planning team hasn't met again. As you know, trying to get schedules linked is very complicated. Even in a pandemic world, when we can all meet virtually, it's still very complicated to get all of those people together. I think, and this is just Rebecca's perspective, and the chief can talk about this. I think that the justice system was probably one of the themes that we heard in that conversation. And I would anticipate that being one of the next series of conversations. And it goes beyond the Battle Creek Police Department, it includes the Sheriff's Department and the prosecutor's office. So I will let Chief Blacker talk a little bit about kind of some of the specific things that came up, and then some action items we certainly have as a city, the police department, and then informing where we go forward. I'll shoot that to you in just a second, Chief Blacker. I just want to go back to the equity audit, and that, that scope is envisioned to look at the city's systems, both internally and then how our systems interact with the community. And so that seems so broad. And for me, I'm trying to get my hands around it as well. But, I think it's a multitude of things, but really looking at, taking a look at us internally and externally, with an equity lens, and where, I think we've done some good work and where I think we could make some improvements. So that is kind of where we left the community conversation from the equity audit standpoint. I will turn it over to Chief Blacker, kind of talk about what the police department has gone through during these times. And then we'll come back and answer any questions you may have, or if either one of us forgot something, we'll kind of tag team.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And I just want to explain sort of the setup here. My camera is there, but then I'm looking at you here. So I hope you understand that this is just easier for me. So the evening last week when we had that discussion, Let's Get Real was really the topic, and Rebecca did a great job, as she normally does, is introducing why these conversations were introduced. And they're certainly not foreign to us. We've had these types of neighborhood discussions before, certainly around violence. It seems every summer in 2016 and again in 2018, we had a series of workshops that happened throughout the city. When I say throughout the city, I'm going to specifically wards 1, 2, 3, and 4, really the ring around downtown. And if you were to look at our violence map, our shootings, that's predominantly the area where many of those things happen. In addition to that, one of the highlights as we discussed this idea of violence and as it focused on Monday night, we really seized the opportunity to talk about how in the past, we've not just talked about these things, but also that Monday night, when Let's Get Real, we said, listen, many of the challenges that we are faced with today have to be looked through multiple overlays of challenges and failed policies and strategic perspective over many, many years, many political cycles, and never really have been appropriately addressed. And I know that comes out as a theme all the time. And I know that was a theme that came out on Monday. The other thing that came out on Monday, and Rebecca introduced the idea, is, well, one, the event went really well. Everyone was frank, they're honest, respectful, and professional. In other words, I've been to many of these before, and they're acrimonious, and there's really, it's not the level of interaction. That wasn't really how this community presented itself on Monday. And I also want to add that that's a pretty remarkable thing, considering if you look at the cities around us, sometimes I think they may present themselves as being more cultural or sophisticated. Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Lansing. Those conversations haven't been able to be had and been productive because they've been so acrimonious. And that wasn't. It wasn't presented that way, and we really haven't seen it yet here in this community. And that right there is a big shout out to the community and community leaders, because they all have a say in what's the tone going to be as we continue this discussion and discovery. A lot of questions about transparencies, specifically about the criminal justice system, but even more specifically to BCPD. Are our policies out on the website, which they were. We pulled them. We're putting them back out, but that's only because we bought a program that will allow us to do that. That's more of a practical issue and a technical one. If we revise or adjust something, policy or procedure, internally, it'll automatically be revised on the website. That way we don't deal with any sort of revision and also intensive manning requirement to keep this stuff updated. The other thing in terms of the cultural justice system is really, when does the law enforcement, police department, sheriff's department, troopers, whatever, when does that work in, and when does the prosecutor pick up, and when do the courts pick up, and when do corrections pick up? How are they how do they interact, but also importantly understand each one is driven by laws, policy, and procedures and practices, and even their own culture that may not be, or certainly isn't, unified by any stretch of the imagination. And so the results of what may happen in a courtroom may not necessarily be the issue of the law enforcement agency that presented the charge on someone. And so there's a significant misunderstanding of that process. And the only way to work through that is to constantly talk about it. But you have to talk about it by using examples on a daily basis, because this is not a binary system. No two cases, no two individual suspects, victims are the same. And oftentimes the facts, well, always the facts are different. Another thing that came out was the culture. The culture of the criminal justice system, but also the agency. Specifically was, do you have a report, an internal reporting mechanism for officers if they see something that someone has done wrong or a violation? And the best way to answer that question is by giving an example. And I shared an example where officers did report what they thought was wrong and how we dealt with it, ultimately leading to a termination, some pretty long-term suspensions without pay, and some letters of reprimands for supervisors. And again, we look at those as development opportunities. And like anything, like any employer, we walk through how most of the lessons learned and some of the best officers out there have been learned through these development opportunities, both positive and negative, and of course from the community. And at the end of the day, if I were to sum up, there is an intense curiosity with appropriate level of introspectiveness and really positivity. In other words, I want to move forward into what is policing like, and how can we better understand what it is that you do. I think that's something that I think all of us on the panel recognize that we could really take advantage of, exploit, if you will, is that deep sense of curiosity. And I don't mean that just among those older participants, which those past meetings that we've had, we had a lot of older participants. Actually, these meetings, we had a lot of younger folks. And that was really good to see their level of interest and curiosity about how the system works. At the end of the day, we all know that law enforcement still has to do what we have to do. Whenever you see a fight or a struggle on camera, on video, it's never going to look pretty. It's never going to look neat. It's clearly not Hollywood. It's very real. It's raw. And trying to get folks to understand how do we get to that point, and then explaining what steps are taken to ensure that hopefully we don't ever have to get to that point, because there's consequences and risks every time we have that kind of physical altercation with members of the public. So again, I thought it was a great discussion. Look forward to the next one, and pending your questions. That's all I have right now.
All right, Rebecca, was there anything you wanted to add on that community conversation?
No, I think Chief Blacker kind of hit the things that I was hoping. No, I'm good.
Well, I actually had a couple of questions. And you mentioned it earlier, when we're talking law enforcement, it's beyond the Battle Creek Police Department. Right in Springfield, you've got the Sheriff's Department doing their law enforcement. Then you've got the prosecutor's office and the court system all involved there as well. How much do we need to be pushing for them to be part of this conversation?
That's a great question, and it's a question that came up. I think initially, as we frame how do we organize this, and it will come up again, how do we organize this conversation? I think it's best that we do it in small steps, because we're not done talking about law enforcement and our work and how we interact with one another. The criminal justice system, as you know, is the largest system in the nation, but it's the largest non-system in the nation. It's not connected. And I think that basic philosophical understanding is important. I think the next step is you're right, bring in prosecutors so that then they can start peeling back the layers and the challenges and cases that they have to deal with, to include bigger, broader discussions of what are the benefits of the plea bargain and what are the takeaways from the plea bargain, for example. That's incredibly misunderstood on that whole process, which, interesting enough, it's really not a part of the criminal justice system. And then finally, you start to talk about the courts and the corrections. That's an entirely another group of folks, and trying to get their interest to come and be a part of this discussion is really not something that judges and correction folks are used to, but I think it's something we can get to if we want to continue these conversations.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's unique. We all kind of are operating under what the governor is putting out about her emergency orders and executive orders and declarations of emergency. But interestingly enough, the courts are under a completely different set of guidelines that come through the Supreme Court office, and they don't follow what the governor. That's that separation of the different branches. So they do tend to have kind of a different approach and a view that we're over here. But I do think we need to, it's not gonna, we can do all the talking you want, but if you don't get all the parts in there to play together, we're not gonna get some changes. Just that, but then the next question I had was, we were talking about policies and we're talking about procedures, but how do we really work on changing things like attitude, understanding, building some, I don't want to say folks are not open-minded, but I just think that there's lack of understanding of the cultures that we've got involved here. How do you work on those pieces as part of all of this?
Well, that is the $1 million question that's out there. And I can tell you that our past experience with, let's start with the department, the ongoing implicit bias training, which is really anti-bias training. It's very surface level introduction to the topic of how we all think differently because we are raised differently and we see the world differently. That, of course, is continuing inside the agency. Where we really took it to the next level is when we participated in programs like the White Men as Allies, as an example. And that was, of course, I think we had 17, 18 people that were through that program. And that was, I believe, about 4 days of pretty intense discussion, Black Caucus, White Caucus, Come Together Caucus, talking about some of these challenges. And of course, we required the one training before you went to that. In other words, it was a layered approach to better understanding, but it was also very productive for us as an agency because it really broadened COP's aperture about what is going on out there and how the community sees them and how they need to see the community differently. Police officers with 10, perhaps 7, 10, 15 years of experience learn this over time. But really what we're finding today, the requirement is really almost right out of that academy. Within a year or so, you need to get smart on a lot of this. Community is going to teach you a lot. The street's going to teach you a lot. But we don't have the time to wait. A lot of risk is involved by waiting. And so that was one, and that was good for us, and I think it's been beneficial. We're blessed that most of our police training officers that train our young folks out of the academy have been through these programs. And some have ended. White Men as Allies well, that funding opportunity has gone away, but we're keeping our eyes peeled for anything similar to that. For the community, as you know, Commissioner, and some of the folks on this panel, attending Citizen Police Academy, ride-alongs, getting to know, getting closer with, and participating with law enforcement, you then get introduced into really how law enforcement see things, but just as importantly, how they get to see the community and how they react together, certainly in some of these critical incidents that happen. And I think that's always been beneficial. It's been eye-opening for both educational opportunities, and I think that's the best way to continue it. Unfortunately, many of those programs have been significantly paused because of our COVID restrictions and also budget limitations.
All right, thank you. If along the way you can think of any ways that this board can assist you, let us know. Anyone else have questions for the chief? Otherwise, I'm going to have one for Rebecca here in a minute. But anyone right now have questions for the chief?
Yeah, Chief, I do have a question. Any idea, you mentioned that they're trying to hold another collaborative or whatever. Has there been any idea when that's going to happen?
We don't have an actual date yet for the next public Let's Get Real meeting, but we do have a planning meeting here coming up pretty quick where the leaders we will talk about react to how the first one went and then sort of set the stage for the next one. I would anticipate, and Rebecca, please correct me, I would anticipate seeing that probably mid-October, the public one.
Okay, I was going to try to be at that one, but I got bogged down in a meeting, so I couldn't make it in time. So I want to make sure that I made it to the next one.
Thank you, John.
All right. Anyone else? Okay, Rebecca, and maybe I should ask this earlier on, but I'd like you to just explain what an equity audit is so that we all are on the same page. Maybe we don't really understand what it means, what it is you're looking at as you're doing that audit.
Well, Commissioner, that is a really good question, and it's something that we're working through with the planning committee. But let me give you kind of an outline because we have one. So there's right now we're focusing kind of 3 big overlying questions. One is assess where we are, both internally and externally. So for example, internally, what is the experience for people of color in our organization? That's an internal example. Externally, are we incorporating racial equity into our analysis of problems that we need to solve in the community? So again, I'm giving you some kind of high level. So assess where we are, and then determine where we need to go. What is the vision for how and where you need to change to promote racial equity? And again, looking at it from an internal and an external perspective. So internally, do we have a shared vision for what it looks like to be an equitable organization? Externally, can we articulate how racial equity helps us solve problems that we are addressing? And then lastly, kind of the third big question is plan how we will get from here to there. So what is our roadmap for change? So internally, do we know what we need to change, grow, and to stop to increase racial equity? And then externally, how will we communicate differently, considering our key messages, our boilerplates, our press releases, our form letters? How do we communicate, and do we need to change in any way? So those are just some examples of the, kind of the broad topics, and then specifically looking at our hiring rates, our promotion rates, our policies and practices, and then our organizational leadership. How are we composed? Do we reflect the community in which we serve?
Are you, as you're building this, because I've seen this summer in reading some of the materials that have been shared with all of the Black Lives Matter discussions that have gone on, all the things that have gone on this summer, that we have to be careful that we don't simply invite people to the party, an African American or anyone of other of a culture or a status, that isn't the typical that we have in our country. You don't just invite them to the party, you invite them to help plan the party, that you involve right from the beginning. Have we got that going on in our organization? I mean, not that, we don't just have the top few people who are there trying to figure out, well, this is what we're looking for. Do we get the people who are impacted in there to get their input?
Well, I think from kind of the very root of this equity audit, we were asked to do it. It's not something the city said we would do. So we're really taking the lead from some of our community partners on what this scope looks like. So I absolutely agree. We know that there's discussions out there about creating other committees, Black Leadership Committee, a Police Advisory Committee, all those things. We're trying not to get ahead of kind of this analysis of ourselves as an organization, as a city. So I like to think that we are, but I know that we have work to do. I don't want to presume. I often say we don't want to do it at the community. We want to do it with the community. And we continue to say that in our planning sessions for these community conversations and et cetera. So because we have had instances in our history where we haven't done that, and we want to improve going forward. I think there are some things we've done well. As Chief Blacker said, we have a history of having community conversations on really tough topics. That kind of has been ingrained in the community even before I got here. So I think that helps in some, in convening some of these discussions, but I think we also have a lot to learn as an organization and as a community. As I said, I have not gone through an equity audit before in my 20 plus years in government, but this is a new day, and we have to look at new eyes at our systems to make sure that we continue to do the things that we should be doing from an equity standpoint, and that we improve in the areas that are identified where we're not doing, as well as we could be doing.
Okay. Any other questions? Other folks here from the committee have questions for Rebecca? Or any comments about all of these things that have gone on? This is your opportunity. We've had a summer of real interesting times. The Chinese proverb, isn't it? May you live in interesting times. So I welcome comments and insights. thoughts?
I think you're doing a great job. I think that you're taking the right approach to it. So, I mean, that being said, there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting left yet still to do. But at the same time, I think that you're taking the correct approach going forward. And I'm sure you're going to have to modify that approach numerous times. But at least you are making these efforts to get it done. So I take my hat off to you if I had one on.
All right. Any other comments?
Commissioner Baldwin, if I could make another comment, please.
Sure.
I think the one thing that has come into play, and I think Chief Blacker mentioned it too, is that we continue to function with a crisis in regards to our budget. We have been asked to do the equity audit, but we've had to be very clear and transparent. We don't have money in the budget to do it. So we need to work with our community partners once we have, what that may look like from a financial perspective, because it's affecting everything we do, all of the services that we provide. And so you put a pandemic on top of fiscal stress, and it does become a little challenging to move things like this forward, but we are committed to doing it and working hard to finding the community partners that can help us achieve it.
All right. Very good. I appreciate that. This leads into what I was hoping that Michelle Hull would be sharing with us is, I know we had lots planned and then we ended up in a pandemic. And so I know that you're working with Rebecca on all of this, and maybe you can give us a few insights as to how our HR department has been operating under all this program.
Well, I'd like to expand that just a little bit more and share with the board, Susan, just a little bit how life has changed.
Yes.
Since March 18th, so to speak. I can't believe it's been 6 months, but it's been that long. And, a lot of the things that you see and you read and you hear is that there's a new normal. And a lot of the city staff has had to transition and do things differently. And that's really what I want to just share with you and go a little bit back to the beginning with some reminders of some of the bullet points that happened early on and how, one thing led to another. And we find ourselves here in September, doing things virtually. So I welcome the opportunity. Thank you for letting me share with some of how our city staff has functioned. I have it on a bullet point, so I'm going to go back and forth. If at any time somebody has a question, if you want to just shout out, because I won't necessarily be looking at our faces. So I'm going to go to my bullet point. Again, the pandemic, Rebecca had to announce back in March. It was a Wednesday, right after a city commission meeting on March 17th, that the city was going to be closing due to the stay home and stay safe order. And I think that very next day was one that was an eye opener to everybody who worked for the city and pretty much everybody in the community, wondering what this new pandemic was going to mean. For us, for me as a new HR leader in the city, I needed to understand what our pandemic plans have been in the past, get those out. We immediately started the JIC meetings over at PD. A lot of the department leaders were over there and engaged immediately with what is this going to look like and what is this going to mean going forward. And again, we had to shut down and close the city. So many employees spent the month of March and April at home on a paid leave status. So the city did elect to continue to pay them. We did have many individuals who transitioned to telework arrangements. So while they had the ability and capability of working from home, everybody still came into the office every day. But when the pandemic hit and the stay home orders were in place, we transitioned to working from home. And we had to focus then on our critical infrastructure employees who continued to come into work, like police and fire and transit. So it was very apparent early on with all of the executive orders and a lot of things that were changing is that we were seeing impacts throughout many of the city departments. Example being no water shutoffs, so it impacted DPW, closure of daycare and social distancing guidelines, restricted opportunities at recreation and full blast, no entry into homes, impacted code and appraiser's office. So we had to transition and figure out, are there different opportunities that we could serve? Or unfortunately, we had to have some difficult decisions about city furloughs. And I know that the the board has been aware that we have had and are still having impact from employees who have been furloughed. That began in May, was our first month of furlough. Prior to that, there was engagement and discussion held with the union organizations. So the leadership and our labor attorney was engaged in dialogue with the union leadership on what the impact of those furloughs would be to individuals. We were able to do the furloughs through a letter of understanding, in that the unions were willing to work with the city on taking volunteers versus forcing junior out. And the city did maintain and has maintained benefits for all employees who have been impacted by furlough even since May. Again, of course, doing furloughs and having many departments who were short-staffed, that's impacted how they've done their day-to-day business. We've had individuals who have had to, take on some share of the workloads, and city departments who are working together to cover absences of individuals who are no longer, or who aren't coming into work every day. And that has been very beneficial in many ways. I'm very thankful that, again, the unions are supportive of, say, somebody who is a BICSA member performing work of somebody who may be an SIU member. And they've been very transparent, very open to say that they're willing to step up and help. But again, it's just a new way of the way that we are doing business. I did want to call out that when we did have to close Recreation Full Blast, that we did open those doors to support the homeless population in Battle Creek. And again, during those difficult times when we went free fare with ATU, and when the city offices were closed and individuals could not come in and make payments at the treasurer's windows, we stopped the fees for our credit cards to be able to pay over the phone. So those are some areas that we were may have assisted the community. The unemployment. So that was a very big one from my office, from a human resources standpoint. When we had to furlough nearly 97 employees that first month in May, there was a very large communication effort that went out to everybody. And we set up an HR hotline, and we set up kiosks at City Hall to help employees go through their unemployment process, which is online. It is and can be a very cumbersome process. Luckily, we had many individuals who went right smoothly right into the unemployment side of things and were able to get their paychecks relatively quickly, including the pandemic assistance. So that was a very good thing. We then hit a bit of a brick wall when the state started getting a lot of fraudulent claims. I'm not sure if you guys heard of that throughout the city. So a lot of people had red flags on their account because perhaps their social security number had been compromised, or there'd been another claim in another state with their name. So they had to go through a little bit of another loophole to get their benefits and their claim reactivated. So a little bit of a hiccup there, but again, we worked through that. With regards to individuals who had gone off, or even those who are still working, feeling the stress or anxiety of coming into work, doing extra work, we did communicate and have been communicating our employee assistance program through Pine Rest, making sure that individuals are aware that that's an avenue of access to them. Even our employees who are furloughed and their family members have access to that benefit. So we continue those communication efforts, and we do keep the communication line open. So there are calls made to employees who are furloughed once a month, either by my office or our labor attorney. So we're reaching out, having those verbal conversations, making sure that everything is okay with them, if they have any questions or if they need anything. And we have started a distribution list with personal email address, so that updates coming out of Rebecca's office or citywide updates that we want to make sure reach our furloughed employees are getting to them, since they're not at work on city network access computers. The pandemic brought up some obviously legislative changes. So the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and from the CARES Act brought in new policy options for cities employees. So it's the expanded FMLA and the new 80 hours of paid sick leave. That has been a benefit that's been available to our employees who are impacted by the pandemic, whether it be because daycare closed back in March, or perhaps they have contracted COVID-19 or have caring for somebody who has contracted COVID-19. So we have avenues of relief there through my office. They work with Elizabeth Reiser. And we've had several individuals who have been able to utilize those benefits. When we started looking at reopening plans in June, we convened a committee for our preparedness and response plan that was required to be in place before the city could be reopened. Many kudos to individuals who were supportive of that committee. And that primarily was a requirement to do daily employee screenings, do daily sanitation in the department and the buildings, and ensure that there is a proper communication for individuals who may come into contact or contract the illness, and how the city would react to protect other employees. So that has been, that's out on the website. It's been trained to for all employees. And again, part of that is the new norm and the changes to work areas that you see wherever you go. So City Hall, if you haven't been there recently, has new plexiglass everywhere. We have the marks on the floor for social distancing. We have avenues of entry and exit. And again, we have visitor screening in place. So that is still in place today. We do it for both visitors and employees are expected to do their daily screening before they come into the city. A majority of City Hall still works on appointment only. So individuals can walk up to the treasurer's windows and make payments or utility billing. But if they're coming up the second floor or need to have further dialogue, they're making appointments with the department heads so that we're aware that visitors are coming on site. We do have limited hours of operation in place still, concluding hours for senior citizens. And oh, no walk up, sorry, I already mentioned that. So that is still in place. And we have decided to close on Fridays because we mentioned that workload and giving the opportunity for employees to be able to take those calls and return those calls to citizens, and making sure that we're able to close the loop on the to-do tasks for that week. As far as training and employment practices, it has been a challenge given that we've been in the beginning of a stay home, stay safe order. So we did have an indirect hiring freeze, and that it was difficult to hire or recruit for open roles when you're in a pandemic and individuals are under a stay home, stay safe order. When it became a need that we had to fill a critical role like a police officer, we started doing Zoom meetings for interviews, and that's worked. And it has continued to work even through the summer months. Individuals who have not been able to come on site, we have just scheduled Zoom meetings because we've become used to that, and it's worked rather well. So we continue to hold those virtually if needed for interviews. Any training so far has been virtually due to the limited number of people who can be in a meeting room. So we've worked through a lot of those. And again, we are still supporting telework. So individuals who can commute or do telework from home, there's been support from the leadership that they can continue to do so. And, you know, for right now, that's been our new norm, and everything is gone virtual. And I think that we have transitioned into that well, although I know that many are waiting for this to just all be over. So I would be glad when it's all over too. There's still some uncertainty, obviously, with the schools being virtual and or being open, what that will do to our community cases, if we see more spikes, what that does with the JIC, or you know, getting those committees back in place again. But we would be ready for anything if that were to occur. So we've had a lot of practice these last 6 months.
All right, you know, thank you very much. You covered a lot of what all we've had to deal with internally at the city. But you've also mentioned several important things that we try to do for the community as a whole. And for example, we had no fares on the buses all summer long. I believe that went back in place the 1st of September. We took away the charge on the credit cards for payment so that people could do that from home. And I know some folks were concerned about putting that back in place. The problem is, you know, it is a cost. You're taking what, 2.5 to 3% off of all the payments if we just cover that cost. And when you start talking about things like property tax payments, that's a big chunk of money. or your income tax payments. That's a big chunk of money. So, and then opening full blast to the homeless for quite some time. You know, those things we stepped right up and did those. So I think that, I think those are some things that we can, you know, talk about positively that the city did. Questions from anyone else about, to Michelle, about what all was going on and what we're still struggling with here? Okay. Well, I appreciate it, Michelle. Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Problem.
Yeah. You're having an interesting welcome to the city. How long have you been to the city now?
I have my 1-year anniversary, July 8th.
There you go. There you go. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. All right. And I've asked Chris Lucier to share with us. I know you've got lots of home stuff still going on out there all summer long. I've seen emails about that. And if you want to just kind of bring us up to date on what all's been going on in your neck of the woods.
Well, there've been a number of different things. We have a new 5-year consolidated plan for the city of Battle Creek and how it spends its community development block grant dollars and home dollars. And there's a number of changes there over the next 5 years that will be implemented, including things like a new down payment assistance program, some improvements to curb cuts for the transit system that will make stops more accessible and should allow us to make some changes to routes that will make that system more efficient. Some vouchers for at-risk and vulnerable populations to get transit passes for I think we're doing that each year for 4 years. Improvements to the homeless shelter. There's some other things in there. Probably the biggest thing in terms of the dollars that are being spent now or being programmed right now, the city did receive, through the CARES Act, received a $729,000 community development block grant allocation from the federal government. And we've, over the course of the summer, allocated those dollars. We also reallocated some funds that had been dedicated to housing rehab activities that were that activity was slowing down with the pandemic. So we reprogrammed those dollars along with the CARES Act dollars to strengthen rental assistance, utility assistance, eviction diversion activities, and housing case management. Largely programming those dollars around the needs of folks that could be struggling to make payments on their rent payments and stay housed. So, and then for folks that end up losing their housing as a result of the pandemic, we have dollars that are focused on helping them become rehoused. So, and the way that sort of breaks down, it ends up being in total a little over $1 million in assistance from the city for those purposes. And it's, we've got about $80,000 going towards housing case management, and those dollars are being spent through the Haven and through Summit Point. The Haven's focused on homeless outreach, and Summit Point is working a little more broadly around helping people stay in their homes or get rehoused. We have close to $60,000 in utility assistance that's going to community action to help provide utility assistance to folks. $400,000 in rental assistance, $80,000 of improvements that were made to Full Blast to be able to operate that as a shelter for the homeless during the crisis. Some funds for legal services, $20,000 in funds for legal services to help with their eviction diversion program, which is really the tip of the spear for this effort. They're doing a lot of great work connecting with folks that are facing eviction or as early as possible in the process so that they can provide them assistance and then also help them connect with resources. And I think I've covered, and we have close to $200,000 worth of tenant-based rental assistance. These are dollars that help people get rehoused and help cover the cost of rent if they lose their housing and they need to be rehoused. So we've got a lot of great partner organizations that have been doing that type of work for a long time. I mentioned most of them, but there are other folks that are working with us, including the Share Center, the Bell Creek Housing Commission, and others. So the one last thing I would throw out there is something we tried to do with this effort was we wanted to put in place an affirmative marketing plan to identify populations that may be less likely to apply or try to access these funds for one reason or another, that may face barriers to accessing these resources, just to ensure that that their distribution of these resources was equitable. And so we did a request for proposal to put together an affirmative marketing plan, and the local Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation initiative put in, through the Battle Creek Community Foundation, put in a proposal and were awarded the contract to put together that plan. And so they've been working through that. That's entailed pulling together a equity task force made up of representatives of local organizations that represent the Hispanic, Latino, African American, Burmese communities, as well as the local tribe, Native American community, and others. And that group has been working with the various service providers to look at their processes, and it'll result in some recommendations to help them develop processes and do the kinds of outreach that need to take place in order to ensure that everyone in our community is aware of those benefits and able to access them. So
That was exactly one of my questions, was how were we going about making sure that we had a broad reach out there to get to the folks who need the help. So that was very helpful. And I'm assuming that the partners are playing roles in what we're getting done there.
yeah, so and every partner, every subrecipient that we have is responsible for putting together their own affirmative marketing plan. But by using TRHT to put together a plan, they can participate in that and adopt that as their plan. This is probably the easiest way to go. And then we've got a lot of great local leadership from those communities that's helping to put that together. So they already did surveys, one-on-one interviews. There've been a number of group meetings where they're pulling folks together to have conversation. I think by the middle or end of October, we'll have that plan in the hands of those organizations so they can begin using that for outreach. The agreements, most of those agreements are already getting put into place. So resources some of the resources may start moving in the community a little sooner. There are a lot of other resources from the state that have been coming into the community, particularly through Summit Point. And so that's allowed us to take a little bit more time to make sure we get this right. In some cases, we're able to use those resources first to help address this need, which is really, pressing. As of like a month ago, it's started to get really pressing. So,
All right.
facing eviction and struggling to make payment.
Yeah.
And I would just also, Whitney Wardell is here as well, and I know Whitney is doing a lot of this work. I don't know if Whitney wanted to comment or add to that from the perspective of the organizations that she's worked with.
Yeah, I can definitely add to that a little bit, Chris. So I've been working a lot with Mackenzie, us here down at Summit Point. I haven't had a chance to talk to you recently, but I'm now the housing lead over Summit Point. So we are doing a lot of work there. as you mentioned, the monies, the dollars that we're getting from MISTA for the eviction diversion program, we have been doing a lot of outreach to landlords in particular, and just encouraging them to work with us in getting their tenants over to us for assistance. We've gotten a little bit of pushback from some landlords not wanting to, so I'll back up a little bit. Some of the requirements that we have for the landlords and what MISTA is looking for, landlords would need to essentially waive 10% of the back rent owed, late fees and court costs, and essentially not take individuals to court for the next 12 months if they're willing to participate in this program. And we can help families with up to $3,500 and up to $1,200 for rent going into the next months. So we're really working with landlords and encouraging them to participate in these programs between MISTA and with the CDBG and TBRA grants that we've received from the city.
And what's the size of the MISTA grant to Summit Point?
Give me 2 seconds and I can let you know. So for MISTA, the grant dollars that we have there, $749,000, so close to $750,000 for assistance.
Yeah, I think in total from state and local funds to various organizations, it's over $2 million in assistance going to these kinds of activities. So
That is correct.
The city did receive another. We just were notified recently. We are getting another allocation of CARES dollars. It's not as large an amount. It's a little over $200,000, but we will probably see how these resources. I mean, we're working to get these resources programmed into the community and see the impact that that's going to have, and then before we allocate these other dollars. Also, I think we're going to benefit a great deal from the TRHT affirmative marketing report. That'll tell us a lot about, what the experiences are in a lot of our neighborhoods and communities in Battle Creek and what some of the critical needs might be. So that'll be really good information for us.
All right. Anyone have additional questions for Chris? I appreciate that, Chris. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, very good. This is all new. All these things we're getting to do are all new. Before I forget, I'm going to just back us up 1 minute. We have a quorum arrived a while back, and so I just wanted to get the approval of the minutes done. So if anyone has any changes, otherwise I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes of February 19th.
I move we approve the minutes, February 19th.
Do I have a second?
Support.
Thank you, appreciate that. All in favor of those minutes of February 19th, please say aye.
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 Opposed. Great, thank you. Just got to get those nitpicky things done. All right. Lots of good stuff here. Any other comments that the board has on any of the materials that we addressed today, or just general comments on how things have been going this summer and ideas for what we're going to do? Go ahead.
I have just a general comment. Just want to update everybody on the news for the splash pad. We have officially broken ground, so we are super excited about that. There are a few donations as the treasurer over that committee. There are a few donations that I still need to put in. So as of today, we are at $22,131 raised for the splash pad so far. So super exciting news.
Oh, that's wonderful. What is it that you're looking to raise?
So right now, and thank you for your donation.
Sure.
We have to raise $50,000 by November 8th. And if we raise the $50,000, the MEDC will match the $50,000 to cover the cost of it's about $145,000 that we'll need to get the splash pad up and going.
And what organization will match that?
It's through all donations are taken through Patronicity, but it's the MEDC, so the Michigan Economic and Development Corporation.
Okay. All right. Well, keep us up to date on that. You know, if
Will
we
do.
need to, at our next meeting, if we need to start reaching out, letting folks know, we want to do that. I think it's a very exciting project.
Yes,
Judy, you
I'm
can
super
email
excited.
me. You can email me my Battle Creek Pride email too, and I can push that information out for anybody that might want to donate.
Alrighty, thank you so much. I will do that.
All right, very good. All right, any other comments then? I appreciate it. I appreciate it. The couple things that I wanted to just cover are for the next meeting in October. I thought I would ask. There's been a lot of work done on the homeless shelter, and they're getting a new location. And I'm going to invite Rebecca or whoever else you care to have come and tell us what's going on there. And again, we'll talk about maybe how this group could help with outreach. I'm also going to reach out to, and Jennifer, I didn't ever hear from Jennifer, but I can't imagine the schools, anything's going smoothly in the schools these days. But if she's available, I'd love to hear how the schools are handling things. And they'll be 6 or 7 weeks into how they're handling things this fall. See if that can't be put on our agenda for the October meeting. And I just got an email, some information from the Kellogg Foundation that is their program. It's a guide they've created on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I thought maybe I'd just share that with folks at our next meeting. I'll make sure and get the document out. And then I was thinking, looking out a little bit further, maybe in November, we could invite that'll be after that next community conversation, sounds like, from the planning. Maybe have them come to the November meeting and the African American Collaborative and the Urban League and talk about some things. So, but feel free, if you have a topic that you would like to have covered or some information that you'd like or something to share, just let me know and we'll cover that. So. Any comments then? Any other things for the good of the order? All right, I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone taking the time. I feel, yeah, I'm maybe at home during this pandemic, but then having to continue to get work done and the committees that we're working on, I'm almost busier now, fitting it all in around these weird meetings and how do we get everybody together, and then handling life when you don't go outside or at least to other buildings has been challenging. So I appreciate everyone being here. Otherwise, if there are no further comments, we'll actually adjourn a little bit early. I'm all for getting 15 minutes somewhere. All right, I appreciate it, everyone. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
It's good to see everybody.